Thank you, Jan. Good morning. So this is sort of a homecoming. It's been really delightful. People haven't said to me, welcome back, but welcome home. And for those who may not know, I can look around this room and I know people who have known me in every decade of my life are sitting here in this room. One of the first Sunday morning worships I ever led was here when I was in, 8th grade, 7th grade. My parents are right there. Say hi, Mom. Say hi, Dad. There you go. It was probably right here when we still lived across the street over on Vern Street. And I led the youth worship wearing, I think Jan was there, so maybe Jan could tell you. Probably a tie-dye t-shirt and Birkenstocks, and my head was half shaved. It still is. Sorry, Mom and Dad. River Road is a very special place. I was, as I said once, knitted in the womb of this spiritual community to be the UU minister that I am today. So your story is part of my story is part of your story. And it's always like, I'm tempted to take off my heels almost. And preach barefoot, because that's usually what I used to do when I was here. But now I come to this place offering a message that I call Love Lift Us. Love lifts us. I remember the moment I first realized that I was descended from enslaved peoples. Sitting in a dark classroom not far from here at Woodacres Elementary School, tears streaming down my cheeks as I absorbed the movie Roots in the 5th grade. Thinking of my African-American father, his black mother, and the unknown generations of enslaved peoples potentially before her that gave her life, and thus him, and thus me. The images of the innocent suffering, the images of the brutality, and the inhumanity, the crack of the whip, I absorbed it all. And in that moment, my 5th grade eyes were awoken anew as I watched the movie projector, remember those? Watched the movie projector display the trauma that has left its indelible mark on this country's history. And I didn't know what to do with this trauma. This pain that I felt deep in my core of what I thought this country was, what I thought of myself and my own family's history, our history as a people. My internal reality, that compass, and my self-concept were irrevocably altered that day. Echoed in the words of Langston Hughes, I am the American heartbreak, the rock upon which freedom has stubbed its toe. That day, my soul and heart suffered what theologians and psychologists alike refer to as a moral injury or a soul wound. When the external reality of the world does not match what you've been taught, the values that you've been instilled with, the identity that has wrapped you in a place of safety and comfort. Rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice, these wounds can be experienced on a personal, community, and institutional level when we fail to live up to our highest and espoused ideals. Scientists at the National Institutes of Health, not too far from here in 2006, published an article titled Weathering Stress and Heart Disease in African American Women Living in Chicago, postulating that lifetimes of systemic racism, social injustice, and health disparities lead to higher instances of heart disease and death. Weathering kills. In short, for some, living life with black or brown skin, suffering systemic and interpersonal violence and indignities, causes waves of trauma to the body and the heart. In short, racism kills. In short, sexism kills. Homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, ableism, ageism, and misogyny kills. So our commitment, our ways of being in the world, our thirst for justice, for building the beloved community even when it's hard, is not just for the good of all people to thrive, but simply to live lives with dignity and purpose, live long, healthy, and fulfilling lives for the good of all humanity. One of my favorite names for the divine is the greatest good in the world. If we step back, if we move back more broadly, and understand soul wounds are a common experience, a byproduct of living and loving in a world where we feel and experience disappointments and soul-crushing anxieties and traumas. Anyone ever felt like that for a minute? Come on now, preach it. We all know that feeling. Too often we see the destruction left in the wake of those who act out their internal pain by inflicting it on others. Wounded people wound. It's a mantra I have to remind myself often. Wounded people wound if that pain is left unidentified and unacknowledged. So my Christian colleagues would attribute this to us living in a fallen world, awaiting the return of Jesus the Christ to come and set the world right again. The day of judgment has not come. And thus we live in sin and brokenness. My Buddhist colleagues would offer a different narrative. We know that Buddha was indeed a man, a human, a flesh of blood, a prince who lived in India and raised in the lap of luxury by an overprotective father who only let his beloved child see and know beauty and comfort in the world. The sick, the poor, the old, and the broken were kept from the prince's sight. The dying and the dead were walled off from the prince's opulent upbringing. Life was easy. Life was good for the prince because that was all he knew. Until one day, Prince Gautama encountered human suffering for the first time. Siddhartha saw death, passed by someone who was poor, someone who was sick, and his entirely constructed fantasy land came crashing down. The prince was mortally wounded to his core with these newfound revelations. What happens when we're confronted with hard truths of the world? The Buddha decided to walk away from his life of comfort, walk away from his pampered existence. And what did he do? What did the Buddha do? He sat. He sat under a tree and meditated with a Bodhi tree around him for 49 days until he reached enlightenment and realized the Four Noble Truths, the core of which is the world is full of suffering, and we suffer based on our attachments, and the way to liberation is to loosen our attachments. A beloved colleague asked me one day, "Why do you suffer so?" "You suffer so because you are holding on too tight." These four noble truths, foundational teachings of Buddhism that we know today, it's now followed by 545 million people in the world, or 10% of the world's population. And it began with a person, a human, sitting under a tree, meditating upon human suffering. Reverend Card and I were speaking before the service. Is anyone watching Black Mirror? Do you know the episode that I'm talking about? If you get a chance, go find Black Mirror. It takes an altered view of reality. And this reminds me of one episode where a mother has a device implanted in her child that blurs out anything that's uncomfortable or painful. Very similar to the Buddha's story, but the end is very different. I won't spoil it. So Buddha could have retreated back into his pampered life, could have seen the world and said, "You know what, I'm good. I'll be over here. Have fun with that." But instead, he moved towards the pain and the hurt and the brokenness. And at essence of the Buddha's teaching is an expansive love that is hard. One of my nicknames as a military chaplain was Chaplain Pollyanna. Sunshine and rainbows, but you know what? That kind of love is hard. That profound compassion for all living things. For in acknowledging the core experience of life in suffering is not only ours, but all people's to understand. That suffering can be a disconnection from the sacred, from peace, from acceptance, from joy. There is suffering, and therefore we are all called to love. There is suffering, and therefore we are all called to love. The Buddha reminds us, radiate a boundless love towards the entire world, above and below and across, unhindered, without ill will, without enmity. Does that sound easy? Heck no. But it's that kind of love that lifts us, that kind of compassion for self and others. This work is hard. Self-compassion lifts us and lightens our soul wounds. Even in the midst of the insanity of this life, love lifts us. Even in the midst of the news streaming heartbreak after heartbreak as families are separated in attempt to seek safe harbor in our midst. Even with the polarizing rhetoric of politicians looking to instill fear and sow the seeds of doubt of personhood. Even in the face of a crumbling democracy that is so in need of our courage and our radical hospitality, we are called to be both and. We are called to be both in the world with our clamoring for that social justice, while also apart from that world in walking the humble path of the expansive love of neighbor. Beloveds, it is a both and. Let us not let the world break our hearts or crumble our resolve to love and to continue to love. How do we continue to do this work of building the beloved community that the arc of justice reaches towards in the midst of this bruising and hurting world? We return to self-care as a spiritual practice. We return to self-care as a spiritual practice, and I challenge you that that is often the greatest challenge of all. In order to be agents of transformation in the world, it begins with caring for ourselves. Perhaps you've heard that old trope, putting the oxygen mask on yourself before you turn to put the oxygen mask on those who need it around you. The words that come to me are, "For you are a good gift." Feminist and author Bell Hooks writes of this radical kind of self-love, this love of self in her work as an activist, as the baseline of how she is in the world. Bell Hooks writes, "The practice of compassion is a profound practice of finding peace. Can I find a space I can enter in with this person who clearly others me, who wants to deny me of my humanity? Can I find this space?" She goes on to write, "We encounter so much everyday aggression. What might seem like a trivial incident can do real damage, and we end up carrying it around." For me, Bell Hooks writes, the alchemical process of meditating, of reflection, allows me not to carry things with me that can paralyze and wound me. Self-care strengthens our capacity to enter into that culture of domination and othering without being constantly wounded. So we return to our coda, that our spiritual mantra of affirmation, that love lifts us. Love lifts us as an ability to be both the lifter and that which is being lifted. We return to our calling to live out that universalist thirst for justice, and if you've been to General Assembly, perhaps you've seen the t-shirts. Our universalist forefathers and mothers, the kin who went before us, their rallying cry was to love the what? Love the hell out of this world. Hell was not a place that you went to after you left this earthly realm. Hell was a place that was created here on earth based on how we treated each other, how we cared for each other, or we neglected to do so. So our charge is to love the hell out of this world. The kids always twitter when I say that. But it is a reminder that love lifts us. Love lifts us so we can create that beloved community here, my spiritual family of heart and soul, here in this time and place. It is the prayer of my heart that you find and live out your calling in the world, for you have an imprint on your spirit that will bring a unique way of being in the world, and together we lift and climb, building the beloved community. Our spiritual mantra of affirmation, love lifts us. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be. I invite you to sing a song of affirmation and rise in body or spirit.